was it you actually said? So today we're going to be talking about pricing homes to sell. And yes, even in a hot market like it is right now, there are homes that just don't sell. And that's pretty easy to figure out just by looking at the expired list every morning from the MLS. It's a lot shorter than it's been in many, many years, but there are still homes that go off the market without selling for 6 months on the market every single day. Now, I want to start by showing you the happy, enthusiastic faces of every homeowner when you tell them the price their home is worth. They get excited, right? That's the way they look. That's the way it works. They never want too much, and we surprise them with a great price, right? Probably not. So almost every time I go out on a listing appointment, the owner thinks the property is worth more than it really is. My favorite, by the way, are former realtors. I've had 4 or 5 of them in the last 2 years because they really think their homes are worth a lot more money because, of course, they know everything. So we have to figure out a way to try and explain, first price the property and then explain that price to the client so that we can hopefully get them to reality one way or another. All right, so today we're going to talk about how to effectively price a property. And I want to start by going over the key idea that we need to get property sellers to understand that they should never pick an agent based on the price the agent tells them the property's worth. And then I'm sorry. Then I'm going to go through the basic steps of creating a CMA, and I'm going to do 3 or 4 real quick ones as examples. And then I can talk about what happens when it's a unique property and there are no comparables. We've had everybody here that's been in the business a while has had one of those. Of course, there are some positives and negatives to some of the comparables that we use, and we have to try and adjust for those positives and negatives. If you're next to a railroad track or at the end of an airport runway, unfortunately, we had a client, and I'll probably share too many stories because I have a habit of doing that. We had a client a few years ago that had built a house back in the 70s, I think it was. Beautiful Cape Cod, large expanded Cape Cod. All 4 exterior walls were granite, a full granite house, just beautiful. And unfortunately for him, the airport decided to build a runway directly behind him. So they put up a large fence behind him and a large fence next to him. And it doesn't matter how well built the house is, you cannot get rid of that sound. So anyway, then we're going to finish up by talking a little bit about objection handling for some of the price objections that we hear over and over and over again. And starting out some of the changes in the market. By the way, while I'm doing this webinar today, you're probably noticing some changes that are already happening in the marketplace. So 2 or 3 months ago, we were getting showings every 15 minutes on a weekend in hot school districts, weren't we? And 2 or 3 months ago, we were getting 10 or 15 offers on those hot properties and hot school districts. We would list a buy level in Parkland School District, which is in the Lehigh Valley market. And I kid you not, we would have 40 or 50 showings that weekend. They would be lined up and we'd have to get it from 8 in the morning till 8 at night every 15 minutes. And that was only 90 days ago. The market is still quite strong, but it's more like 4 or 5 showings on a Saturday instead of 20. And it's more like 2 or 3 offers on that property rather than 10. That is possibly a trend happening because so many of the buyers who were desperate to find a home earlier this year found one. And because there's more inventory coming into the market. And by the way, in the next couple of months, you're going to start seeing the foreclosures hit the market as well. And all those builders who got stalled because the townships weren't taking applications for subdivision, they will come into the market as well. So more homes on the market means a greater supply and fewer buyers in the market because there's less panic coming out of New York and there's many buyers who found houses, means less demand. And that pricing is driven by supply and demand. Again, that doesn't mean the market's going to crash and burn, but we have to be conscious of what's happening around us so we can properly advise our clients. And frankly, I think if you explain this to your listings when you're first listing a property, you're taking it from a different perspective, and maybe they're not worried quite as much about getting that top dollar. Maybe they're worried about getting it sold before the market completely collapses. First of all, try very hard to not let them pick an agent based on price. The most important thing you can say so you can get them talking about how you're going to get the property marketed, not stuck on the highest price. And let's be honest, the other thing is that you're going to be competing with other agents who are going to overprice the house. You're going to be competing with other agents who are going to discount the commission. in order to get a sign up in the yard. And we've got to counter both of these up front. The honest agents are going to, well, this is what I would say to a client. You may be interviewing 3 or 4 or 5 or 77 agents, whatever, but they're all looking at the same MLS data. And the honest agents are all going to give you a price range within 2 or 3%. That's because we're all looking at the same comparables, the same solds. So you're not hiring me because I would tell you the highest price. That'd be crazy. You're hiring me to do the best job marketing your home in the industry, and that's what I do. We're going to do the best job getting your home on every major platform, including digital, social media, and everything else. So let's start, before we get into price, by talking about how we're going to market your property effectively. You always want to try and talk about marketing before you ever get to price, because they don't hear you after you tell them what the price is. And there are 3 pricing strategies. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my job is to help you to make good decisions, but it's really up to you how you want to approach the market. It's up to you to determine what is the right pricing strategy for your situation, your circumstances. I don't want you to underprice your home and give it away. I don't want you to give away some of your potential income from it. But I also don't want to see you overprice the home and scare away the best buyers in the market. So these are the 3 strategies in selling a property. We can price the house above the market. In other words, we can shoot for the stars. We can go for the highest possible price. We want to break all records for price in the neighborhood and hope to find that one person, that needle in the haystack, who might want the house so badly that they'll pay above market to have your property. And let me be honest, the vast majority of those homes that are priced high sit on the market without selling. Even in this hot market, there are homes that expire off the market in this MLS every single day. And that happens because they're priced too high. But I acknowledge that is a strategy, and there's always going to be some realtor who's going to tell you your house is worth higher than the market price. The second strategy is to go over the recent sales and figure out what the most likely sales price is. That's what we call the fair market value. It's the value of similar homes competing with yours for a buyer. Because remember that the average buyer is going to look at a dozen homes before they purchase one, and they're going to base their valuation of your property on what they see competing with it in the marketplace. Fair market value is also when lenders are going to agree to lend based on once the appraiser looks at the home. Hang on one second. Just fixing one thing quick. Third strategy, if it comes up, is something that really savvy property sellers are employing in the current market. That's to create an auction effect by slightly underpricing the property, or by pricing pricing it slightly below fair market value. And let me explain before you throw me out the front door. If you have a nice home like yours, with amenities like yours, and a great location like yours, and your price is a little below market value, you get something called the auction effect. The lower price creates 2 emotions, desire and fear. Somebody has to have it, and they're afraid. They have that fear that somebody else is going to buy it out from under them. That's where we create a frenzy. We create a bidding war where buyers are likely to bid the price up above that fair market value because they just have to have the house. Of course, under any of these pricing circumstances or pricing strategies, we're going to do our best. We're going to do the best marketing in the entire region. But again, we can price it above the market. And there's some realtors going to come in and tell you that it's worth more. And by the way, when I said earlier, we can look for that needle in the haystack, I use that line pretty regularly. We can shoot for the stars. We can try and find that needle in a haystack, somebody who's going to pay over market price for the property, because I want them to understand that that's not real likely to happen in any market. That's not real likely to happen. We want to get them either at the fair market value because that's what's in their best interest, or we want to get them a hair under fair market value because sometimes you can actually get a better price by, in this market, pricing it a little under the market. Now my slides aren't changing for some reason. There we go. Now this is from an appraisal course that we do, and it's talking about the steps to an appraisal in a sales comparison approach. When you're trying to value a property, you first try and figure out the elements of comparison and how you're going to adjust the value. And let me explain it a different way. If you're trying to price a colonial in a neighborhood mostly of colonials, you're going to probably pick colonial as the type of property you're looking for. You're not going to pick bi-level and ranch. Now, I do typically also pull the neighborhood, because too often you'll get in front of an owner and they'll say, but the house down the street just sold and they got X, but it's not the same style, so you didn't get it in your comparable. So I may run 2 or 3 sets, but identify what really is comparable to this property. I need something that's at least 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, 2 stories, and built between 2000 and 2021. You identify the elements first, and then you select the comps based on those elements. And you adjust those comps to try and approximate what the subject has. If this has an extra bath or an extra car garage or something else, and then you try and reconcile those adjusted prices to figure out what it's worth. That's what an appraiser does. Now, we're not going to get quite that technical, but we're going to do the same general idea to try and figure out what the value of the property is. Okay, maybe I went a little overboard with the transitions for the slides. So when I'm trying to do comps, and I'm going to do 3 examples, at least 3 real quick. First step to do is search. This is something a lot of realtors forget to do. Search to see if the property was ever in the multi-list before, especially if you haven't been there to look at the property before you take comparables to them. Put in the address and see if it happens to come up, because if it does, you'll have a lot of data on that property. So look for an old listing, pull the tax record, and then talk to the seller on the phone if you can in order to build rapport, but also to kind of determine their needs and motivation. You want to understand what, if they're just trying to shoot for the stars, and if it happens to sell, it happens to sell, or if they need to be in Texas in 3 weeks because of a job relocation. And then run sold comps and listings for the last 6 to 8 months. Now, this depends on the market. We're in a hot market right now, so most comparables, I wouldn't go back more than 6 months. If we're in a slower market where there are fewer properties selling, I might go back a year. Some cases, if it's an unusual property, I might go back a year and a half, and appraisers do the same thing. If you're looking for a ranch house in the middle of 30 acres, you may not find comparables in the last 6 months. You may not find comparables in the same school district. So you may have to go back further. You may have to go to a wider area. But what you do for most listings when you're trying to value them is pick the same neighborhood, and I'm going to explain that, the same style house, contemporary, colonial, ranch, townhouse. Try and get roughly the same size and same age. That's where you can really value that property. So the first one I'm going to use is a property on Dogwood Lane in Upper Macungie that we sold either late last year or early this year. It's a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath colonial. This is the Parkland School District, which is, and I will do Poconos as well. This is a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath in Parkland. Parkland is the hottest school district at the moment in the Lehigh Valley. Buyers seem to be beating each other up to get these houses. There are many popular school districts, but this one seems to really attract attention. This house was built in 2012 during the downturn in the market, 2,200 square feet and a 2-car garage. So I want to figure out what this house is actually worth. So I'm going to go into the Lehigh Valley multi-list in this case. And by the way, we belong to 8 multiple listing systems. The Lehigh Valley and Bright use the same back-end software, which is Rapatoni. The Pocono multi-list, the Pike Wayne, the Ocean Monmouth, the Scranton multi-list all use the Flex multi-list. And the few of you that are just New Jersey licensed, and we have several of you, use the Garden State, it's outright terrible. They have to go with something else. Anyway, so I can try and pull up the old listing. I already know what the old listing is, and I already know all the details on this particular property. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me pull that back up for one more second. It's also in the subdivision of Whispering Farms. So I know I've got a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath colonial, 2,200 square feet in Upper Macungie. If I start and I search, detailed residential search, I'm going to pick available, I'm going to pick sold, and I'm going to pick under agreement. I have not been picking recently expired and withdrawn because it doesn't help my case when I'm trying to value a property. So on expired or on solds, let me start by going back to, let's say October 1st. Now let's do January 1st, January 1st, 2021 plus. I'm going to do residential. I'm going to do detached. Now, if I wanted to take it to an extreme, I can put in number of bedrooms, number of baths, age. I normally start by trying to do a broader search and then narrow it down. And there's 2 things I want to do when I'm doing a search for a house like this. One is I want to know the neighborhood itself. And the second one is I want to know similar properties in the entire township, what they're selling for. And there's a reason behind both. So down here, you're going to see there's over 5,000 homes that meet those criteria. So I'm going to narrow it down to Upper Macungie Township. And we're still at 175 listings. If you can see that at the bottom, that's a little bit much. I can change it to the subdivision of Whispering Pines, or Whispering Farms, I'm sorry. And that takes me down to only 9. Now, I will do that most of the time. I will actually pull up just the neighborhood, and you'll see a range of 429 is the only listing. The sales since January 1st are 410 to 440 is a fairly tight range, and then an outlier here at 570. Obviously, that's not similar to the rest of them. There's one under agreement for 429.9. So all by itself, this gives me a pretty good idea what properties are selling for. This first one is similar in size to the one we're trying to price, 2252 square feet, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, built a little earlier in 2006. They're asking $429. It's been on the market over 2 weeks and hasn't sold yet. Sales in the neighborhood, 410 for a slightly smaller one, 1988 square feet. Also slightly smaller, 2185 square feet for 415. And you can see that they were asking $399 and it was bid up because they underpriced it slightly. Third one down on Sleepy Hollow Road is pretty large and went for only $415. So maybe something's wrong with this. We'd have to investigate this a little bit to see why it sold as low as it did. Windy Bush is a hair larger than ours, and that sold back in February for $430. This is actually the comp that we sold for $435. And then you jump up to larger houses. This one for $570 is 3,238 square feet and has finished basement. And there's one under agreement that's 2,500 square feet. They were asking $429.9. It sold in 5 days. What that probably means is it went into a multiple bid situation and probably went for over $429.9. And it even says in here, multiple offers have been received, highest and best due by noon on Monday. So chances are it went for higher than that price. So I've got some pretty good comps here. There's a set, and I'm going to print these if I'm going to meet with the client and actually sit down and go through them with them. Now, I'm not going to print the whole version. In the Lehigh Valley multi-list, I change it to this summary tab. You can do whatever you'd like. Or I export it into Toolkit CMA, which I did put up a video on that the other day. I'll export it into Toolkit CMA and print it in a nice format so I can take that along. The other way I might do this, let's go back to criteria for a second. Instead of putting in the subdivision, I might instead try and narrow it a different way. Now that property is 2,012 square feet, I think. No, I'm sorry, 2,206 square feet built in 2012. So let's say we look at this subdivision again, we look at this area again, but this time we're going to put just 4 bedrooms, just 3 bathrooms, 2 full and 1 half. Above grade square footage, 2,000 to 2,400. Let's go 2,450. And it narrows us to 25 listings. Let's put in a year built of 2000 to 2021. Now we're down to 12 listings. Now, again, this is broadly looking at the entire township, not just that subdivision, to look at what's around it. And I'll show you one third possible way. Again, we've got 429 for the only listing. Then you've got sales of 415, 430, 435, 436, 449, and 450. A little bit bigger again as the size goes up. So does the value a little bit. 455, and there is one at 490. Not sure why that stands out. And there's one under agreement for 419, 425, and 449. So we're all in a tight range if I look at the township. Now, this isn't always true because sometimes different parts of an area do better than other parts. So if I go to map here for a second, you can see Upper Macungie is a pretty large area. So I might not want to use these comps because they may be higher or lower than what I'm looking at. So I may pull up a polygon here and I may just limit it to the houses around it. A second, let me mute everybody. All right, I might just limit it to the houses around the one that I'm trying to price. Now, if I go back to results here for a minute, 429, 415, 430, 435, 450, 455. It didn't really narrow it that much, but it does at least show you the houses around it. I hope that makes sense. That's number one. It's an easy one to do. Now, also, if I am trying to value this property, a lot of times agents will ask me about basing it on price per square foot because so many clients say, well, my house is worth X because houses in this area are selling at a price per square foot of Y. Now, here's the problem with that. Houses in the same size range tend to sell close in price per square foot and in the same age range. So when you're looking at a Zillow algorithm, for example, you might have a house that you're trying to price that was built in 1970 and everything, and this happens, and everything else in the neighborhood was built in 2010. And that house built 1970 is 3,200 square feet, and all the newer houses are 2,000 square feet. And those newer houses are selling for $190 a square foot. So you get to the owner's house, and owners are amazing. They must all go to the same school at figuring out that their house is worth more than it actually is. And they average out that the houses in their area are worth $190 a square foot because they found that on Zillow. And so they multiply 190 times their 1970s 3,200 square foot house and find that their house is worth 150,000 more than any recent house built in the same neighborhood. That's obviously unrealistic. You have to have houses in the same size range. Why is that? Because frankly, it's cheaper to add to a house. So for example, if you buy a lot, you're paying a certain amount for a lot. You're paying a certain amount for a tap-in fee for water and sewer, or a certain amount for a well and septic. You're paying a certain amount to grade that lot, to put in the foundation, to put in the driveway. The rest of it is a lower price point. We're averaging this cost over the square footage that exists. So if you're in a neighborhood where the lots cost $100,000 a piece, and you built a 2,800 square foot house versus a 2,200 square foot house, your price per square foot is going to be less on the 2,800 square foot house. Let me say another one. Let's say you're building a ranch versus a two-story. Ranches cost more to build per square foot than two-story colonials or bi-levels. The reason is, on a two-story colonial, it's cheaper to build up, to build that second floor where you don't need a foundation than it is to build a ranch because ranches are built out. You need a foundation for the entire thing, and that's more expensive than building that second floor. Bi-levels are even cheaper to build because effectively it's just a ranch built out of the ground. The basement becomes the first floor. So that extra square footage is really just a finished basement. So again, it's going to be less per square foot. So you want to price it along with similar houses. Now, if you do take the data and you plug it into an Excel format and you find those same comps that I just pulled up, you're going to see a price per square foot that ranges from 177 up to 201. It's a pretty wide range. Now, I can look at these and try and figure out if I want to throw out any outliers. We might find out that one might be lower as an example because it's only 3 bedrooms. So people don't buy 3 bedrooms as much. And that one went for 179 a square foot. This one's also 3 bedrooms. Again, 179 a square foot. That might be why it sold as low as it did. The other thing you might look at in this particular market is the fact that prices have been rising month by month. So I might go back and throw out the 2 earliest comps, which incidentally happen to be the 2 lowest sale prices per square foot, and not use those. Now, when the market's sliding and going the other direction, I use this the other way and show them that the price per square foot is actually going down. When the market does shift, and it will at some point, when the market starts going down, that is the hardest time in the real estate business because owners still expect, because the press will still be talking about how wonderful it is, owners still expect these high prices and houses to sell fast. And as they don't do quite as quickly or as well as they expect, they blame you. It must be the marketing. So anyway, if we throw out these 2 comps and we take a range of about 180 to 190, we don't use this 201 because that sticks out pretty far. We've got a value on a 2,300 square foot house of about 414 to 437. So it's a fairly tight range, and we can add and subtract for what's there. If I want to do a second comp, and I did this in the Toolkit CMA one, but I want to show it to you again because I want to show it to you slightly differently. This is one we sold also in the Parkland School District, and I will get to the Poconos. And it's a townhouse, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath with a finished basement. It is 1,870 square feet, which I think is good. Somebody asked if I could slow down a little bit. I will do my best to slow down, although I'm not the best at talking slowly, I'm sorry to say. I'm going to do the same thing again. In this case, we have a residential property I'm trying to value. And I'm going to pull up, this time I'm going to go back to October 1st, 2020 and ahead. So I'm picking available listings, sold, and under agreement. That gives us the best idea. Available is what we're competing against in the marketplace. We have to be in line with those. Otherwise, people are going to buy other houses. I'm looking at what has sold recently to give us an idea what buyers are paying for houses and also what an appraiser will appraise it at. And what's under agreement because those are the most recent ones. I'm also doing residential, and I'm going to do just townhouses, end townhouses, and semi-detached. And again, I'm going back to, I think this is Upper Macungie. There's 177. Now, I'm never going to be able to weigh through all of those and try and value a property that way. So again, we'll try doing two things. The main one I'm going to do is pull up either the subdivision or a map search. I'm going to pull up a map search in this case. And you'll see again, Upper Macungie is a huge township, and there are listings all over the place. The ones we want are right here, and they're kind of by themselves. And actually, that is not what I want. The ones I want are right here in this subdivision. Just make sure I got the right one. I do. I'm going to, again, draw a polygon. And by the way, you can do this in any of the multi-lists. And I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to look at the results. And now I've got 19 of them, and this is a wide range. There's nothing for sale. That's a good sign. So a whole bunch of them under agreement. It's also a good sign. But the prices run from $219,900 and go all the way up to $261,000. It's a pretty wide range for townhouses in the same neighborhood. So I start looking at it, and I realize all of the lower priced ones are from the end of 2020. And so I'm probably hurting my numbers by using those. So I'm going to go back to the criteria again. And this time I'm going to change it to January 1st, 2021. And I'm going to reduce it down to 12 comps. Now I've got a range of 233 to 261, and that looks like an outlier. Most of them are 233 to 245. It's only a $10,000 spread, $12,000 spread. Very tight range. Now the ones that are under agreement were priced between 244 and there's a 267 here, but again, within a $20,000 range. So I'm going to do a summary listing of this, and I can look at what's most comparable to the property I'm trying to price. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that the property I'm trying to price is an end unit, and a lot of these are mid units. And also the one I'm trying to price is a finished lower level. So if I look through these, I see one end unit here. And by the way, mine is a 2-story model versus a 3-story. So you will find in townhouses that 3 stories tend to sell typically a little lower than 2 stories of the same size. In many cases, the 3-story is bigger. Reason is young couples buying these houses do not like to carry their after the first year, don't like to carry their groceries in and then up to the second floor to the kitchen, dining room, and so on. By the way, segue just for a second. I sold a beachfront property in Sea Isle City a little while back, and we were looking at some of the townhouses there. They're 4 stories. There was one that was 5. And they're townhouses like these, and they're set up very interestingly in case you happen to run across this. And by the way, we do sell beach properties, so anybody you know who wants to buy something, let us know. There's a good number of agents in the company that are licensed there. So if you've got a 4-story, for example, townhome, because you want to take advantage of the views in a particular area near a beach, you put the deck on top of it 4 stories up. And because you want the best view possible from the living room, many of them had the living room, dining room, and kitchen on that 3rd or 4th floor to take advantage of the views. So you go in the garage level, or sometimes it's actually a carport, and that allows water to flow through if there's a flood. First floor has a master bedroom suite with a full bath. Second floor has 2 more bedrooms with another bath. And then the upper 4th floor has living room, dining room, and kitchen. Can you imagine carrying the groceries all the way up there, your cooler, everything that you want to have, all the way up to the top when you're trying to vacation? But anyway, I digress. So this is a 3-story, the lowest price, and it's also a mid-unit. That went for $233,000. Now you've got the first 2-story, which tends to be a little bit higher in price typically, for $235,000. You got the first end unit, $235,000, second end unit, And third end unit is also a 261. So you'd have to try and look at it and come up with an idea of where it's going to sell. Hang on 1 second, Leon, and I will get you in just a second. And then the ones that are under agreement now, you've got a 2-story for 242, but it's a mid unit, another mid unit, another mid unit. First end unit is 245, another mid unit. End unit is 265, and an end unit is 267. Now you see the highest price is an end unit that's a 2-story unit, and it's also a little newer than the other ones. Go ahead, Leanna, what's up?
I apologize, Lauren. I got so much going on in the house right now, and the kids are going to go to a doctor appointment shortly. You may have said it, and I just can't hear it. What I'm really concerned about is in this market, when we do give the comps, it was always drilled in my head that I have to find colonials for colonials, bi-levels for bi-levels. Bi-levels and ranch could go side by side, but you can't put a bi-level next to a colonial side by side. It's like, I need to have more, like you're doing townhouses, that's great in theory, but when I'm doing my CMA and it's say a 2,000 square foot ranch, and I'm looking within the 3 miles, how do I find comps if there's no ranch that's 2,000 square feet? That's what's really annoys me.
I'm coming to that. So
I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Right. No problem.
So I could come back. I do apologize. If you're going to do it, just tell me to hang up.
No, that's all right. No problem. And the other thing is, when you look for something, if you can't find a ranch in the same township, and you can't find exactly what you're looking for in the same area, that's okay. You try and find everything that's around it as well. So for example, let me go back to this a second. And if I'm in a development, let's say, oh boy, let's say Alton Park or Oxford Park. Hang on. Okay, let's say we're going to look at an area called Alton Park or Oxford Park in Allentown. And I'm going to use this as an example. We were trying to price one the other day. And I'm going to go back to January 1st again, 2021. Reason I'm using this is South Allentown, is there is a little bit of a mix of properties in the area. So if I go to a map search, I know that this particular location is right here. Now, this subdivision is about 660 houses. It was built, I think, back in the 50s. Okay, I'm not sure why it did that. Hang on. That's not exactly what I wanted. Hang on a second. Let me back up and clear this. I figure out how to clear all shapes. There we go. All right. Now I want this neighborhood of Alton Park. It's a starter home neighborhood typically, or a retirement home neighborhood, a lot of small ranches in the neighborhood. So let's say you have a 2-story here, because there are some 2-stories. And you pull the area and you find everything is a small ranch. Even if you find everything's a small ranch, because the neighborhood is primarily ranches, I would pull all of it anyway and search that and bring it along so you can show the difference. But ultimately, you also want to do both. You want to pull the neighborhood and bring that along so that you're familiar with the pricing there, knowing that your house is 2 stories is going to be higher than these houses. And then you're also going to take the same criteria and you're going to try and widen it out to a larger area. And let me show you that a little bit differently in the Poconos. We'll start with this one on Pocono Country Place. And by the way, a contemporary Pocono Country Place, I want to price this house at 535 Country Place in Coolbaugh Township. And Pocono Country Place is in Coolbaugh Township. Is that a different price point than Arrowhead Lake and Pocono Farms? Anybody tell me? Because they're all in Coolbaugh Township, right? And don't answer that. We're recording this. So I want to try and find a property that's similar to this, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, that has a similar style to this. And in a way, this is sort of what Leanna's talking about. If I can't find something exactly the same, what do I end up using? And what I may end up using is a single in the same size range in order to make it work if I can't find something like this. Now, I will find this model because it happens to be pretty popular. But I want to try and find this type of property and figure out what it's worth. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to jump over to the Pocono multi-list. And I'm going to pull down, boy, it drives me crazy that Flex got rid of the detail search because I really preferred the detail search. But I'm going to click on quick search. And again, I know I've got to find comps. I want pending and closed. And under the Pocono multi-list, it automatically goes back 365 days. I don't want to go back that far. Let me go back 200. That'll be a little over 6 months. And in this case, I want Coolbaugh Township, if I can find it. There we go. Now we're down to 655 sales. You can see them all over the place here in Coolbaugh Township. I'm also going to put in a square footage range. The house we're trying to price is about 1,400 square feet. So I'm going to do 1,100 square feet to 1,600 square feet. That brings us down to 251. And it is a contemporary. So I'm going to go to style and I'm going to pull out contemporary. Now, contemporary can mean almost anything these days, but to at least limit it somewhat. Now, if I look at just these contemporaries, there's 109 of them that show up. It's quite a bit. If I just look at these, I review results, you can hunt and peck the ones that are similar. Actually, there's some newer houses here too. We can hunt and peck the similar ones to what I'm looking at. Like here's one for 325. But the reality is the prices of some of these, and here's a similar layout as well, for 160. So what makes the difference between this 325 and this 160? If I go back for a second and edit the search, if I want to pick Arrowhead Lakes as an example, if that were what I was looking at, because again, this is the same township, same school district, right? If I just pick Arrowhead Lakes and I look at these 20 comps, I may be able to find something similar. And by the way, whenever you're trying to price something, obviously lakefront property goes for a whole lot more than anything else. But here's that 325. Now, again, it's a little bigger than the one we're doing, but it's not much bigger. It also doesn't have a garage, and still at 325, it's under agreement. If I look for similar ones in the area, it's not a lot. Now let's stick with that one and say, okay, Arrowhead Lakes is not a bad area to try and sell properties. Let's instead back up, and I'm going to try and clear that search again. Clear polygon. And this time I'm going to go up to this lower part, kind of below where I'm looking at in Pocono Country Place, PCP. And in that area, there are 25. And again, let's see if we can find this model. There's one. That model is 245 here. There's one that probably needs some work at 187. And there's one for 229, same basic style. Now let's go back one more time, and I'm actually going to change it over this time to Pocono Country Place. So I could have put in the subdivision. I could do that a couple of ways. I can put in location development, put in Pocono Country Place, which if I did that, we'll limit it to these, or I can draw a polygon. I picked instead to pick that subdivision. For this year, prices have really gone up there. But if I look for that same model, here's one that went for only $100,000. That obviously needed some work. Looking for that model again, here's one at 165. Here's one at 177. So we can price it based on what's in the neighborhood. Now, for example, back to the point that Liana was making. And by the way, if I go to list, I like to sort these so that I have the available at the top and then the sold and then the pending, or the other way around, pending and sold, because I like to be able to go through them a little bit easier from lowest to highest price. But if I couldn't find that style house, and I couldn't find even a two-story, that most of them were ranches or capes, I'd still pull the subdivision. I would limit it by square footage and try and use those. And then when I'm going through, try and look at the fact that a two-story is going to probably be higher in price than a single-story house or than a Cape Cod in the same area. But I'm still going to look at that neighborhood, and I'm going to narrow it down to that area if I have to. The area, the square footage, and the age are the things I'll have to narrow it by if I can't find a buy level. And again, when you're looking at price points, buy levels and Cape Cods tend to be on the lower side in price. Ranches tend to be higher in price, and 2 stories tend to be higher in price unless it's a giant buy level. A couple of people have raised hands, so let me, Liana, and actually it doesn't say who the second person is.
Thanks,
So
Lauren.
go ahead. What's up?
Thank you.
Yeah. Kathy, do you have a question?
Yes. Thanks, Lauren. So when you're, I don't know how often you go in, but to look in the pictures, because what I'm trying to do when I do a comp is compare the condition of the home. So when you have a crappy house that doesn't have, an old kitchen, old bath, maybe even borderline fixer upper, and you're comparing it to something that's completely remodeled, of course, you're going to have a price difference. But if you, so if you don't have another crappy house to compare the crappy house to, how much do you
I'm
like,
getting
do
to
you
that.
actually go through? Actually, okay, all
Yeah,
right. So
I
do
will
you,
get
like,
to
I
that.
go through and say, okay, 20 grand for the kitchen, 5 grand for the bathroom. Okay, that's
Yep.
fine.
And-
And then part two, I'll wait
Yeah.
for that. Then part two of my question is, do you ever do the market condition cumulative detailed report that you go back a whole year and show in 3 months increments going back a whole year, the changes in the pricing? That was a little trick I got from Wassel when I was picking his brain one day.
Yeah,
So I don't know if you ever used that.
I
And I
have.
was wondering if you could explain that to us in a little bit more
Um,
detail and what those numbers mean,
not
if you have
easily.
time.
What I'll probably do is come
Okay.
back and do a quick like video of that and send it out to everybody, because I want to make sure I get it right. And it's been a while since I looked at it. That exists, by the
Okay.
way, in at least most of the multiple listing systems, where you can look at the trends. And one of the nice things about the trends is you can see averages going up and down. The problem with it is it doesn't necessarily work exactly right for any type of property. So you still have to narrow the market to what you're looking at. And
Okay.
when you're
Thank you.
pricing properties, and I will come back to houses that need work. I'm sorry. So getting back to when you're trying to price properties, as we know, everybody thinks their house is worth more money. And I apologize for those of you who have heard this before. But a few years ago, Tim Mahan and I were on a listing appointment to look at a townhome in Allentown, the pricing of which would be relatively easy because several had recently sold in the neighborhood. The owner met us at the front door, walked through the home, noting that was fairly typical of the townhomes in the neighborhood. It was very easy to price because the home directly next door had just sold. So we know that the house is worth about what the one next door just sold for. But when Tim explained that the house would very likely sell close to the price of the next door neighbors, the owner's mood changed. He was offended that we would even compare his home with his neighbors. My home's worth at least 25,000 more than his. Do you realize that the neighbor's home has all the rooms painted builder white? Mine has color on the walls. And the neighbor has regular closet bars, and I had creative closets put in double racks and PVC. And also, I had a hose bib put on both the front and back of the home. The neighbor only had one on the back. How do you wash your car? Plus, I'm planning on throwing in the 25-foot garden hose. And Tim actually lost at that point. The garden hose, he said, wow, that's got to be worth what, Lauren? 5,000, 10,000 in price. Why don't we list the house 40,000 higher if you're going to throw in the garden hose? Yeah, we didn't get the listing. But the truth is, people can convince themselves of almost anything when they're trying to come up with a value of their property. There are items that you're going to run into when you're trying to price a property that are hard to justify, hard to price. There are times when you've got to adjust comparables to add value or subtract value, just like Kathy was saying, if the house needs a lot of work. Now, these are adding value, but all the other homes in the neighborhood don't have in-ground pools. So mine is worth 60,000 more because that's what it cost to put in the pool. So let me ask all of you, how much does a $60,000 in-ground pool add to the value of the house? Anybody can shout out what they think. Anything.
5,000, maybe
Anybody else?
3.
It's true.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
5.
Yeah. And this is terrible. And people get really upset about this because someone who loves in-ground pools will buy the house because of the in-ground pool. I have seen some appraisal workshops where they said for an in-ground concrete pool, one of the more expensive ones, you can add 5% of the value to the house. I've seen other estimates that are $5,000 or $8,000 or maybe $10,000. But if you even add 5% to the value of the house and you have a $350,000 house, that $60,000 pool just added 17.5. It doesn't add the value of the pool. You have the same problem with A pole building, and by the way, people love them. Anybody who's a contractor, anybody who has a lot of cars or a large collection of something, I've seen people use pole buildings for sewing studios, to do hair dressery or whatever you want to call it. I can't think what that's called, in the back of the property, which they probably aren't allowed to do. But what's the pole building worth? It's never worth what they paid to put it in. What if you've got an extra large lot? Well, their lot was only half the size, so my property must be worth 50,000 more because that's what lots were selling for. Or it's got an extra bathroom, or it's all brick or all stone, or they added a room addition, or they have a Viking stove with 6 burners, or you've got a fireplace versus not having a fireplace, or upgraded flooring, or granite or marble countertops, and nobody else in the neighborhood has them. Floyd Wickman, one of the real estate trainers, used to say, but my house has the heavy duty nails. My drywall is never going to come off the wall.
Lauren, do we add $10,000 per, like hypothetically speaking, if it's a 3-bedroom and now it's 4 and 5 bedrooms, do we add 10,000 for each additional bedroom?
No, it really depends on where it is and what it is. So what I try and do really is try and find houses that are 4 bedrooms, if humanly possible, rather than try and add to it. If you happen to have the only 4-bedroom house in the neighborhood and everything else is 3, then you've got to try and figure out a factor to add for it. And that factor may be 10,000, but it might not be. And this gets really complicated and hard to do. When appraisers do this, and this is just one of the examples that we've used for appraisal, if this is the basic house, and let's say this is what you're trying to appraise, you've got comparables. So what's the fireplace worth? And you've got another sold over here that has a front covered porch. What's that porch worth? How do you subtract or add for those? And when you're estimating the value of upgrades to a house, the upgrades are not based on the cost. They're based on the difference buyers will pay for one property over another that doesn't have that extra item. And by the way, that 4th bedroom can add a lot of value because more people want a 4-bedroom house than a 3. With an appraiser, they're supposed to do something called a regression analysis. It's basically plugging everything into Excel. And you're supposed to take a broad look at all the sales in the area and then try and control for each feature of the house and try and estimate the value of that component. What's the value of a fireplace? There's also some guides out there. Now, I'm not saying you need to do this because you shouldn't. There's a guide called Marshall and Swift, which you can find online, that will tell you in any particular area the rough value of something as a reproduction cost, the rough value of adding something to a property. So if a fireplace costs $10,000 to add, it's probably only worth $2,500 or $3,000 if the colonial has or doesn't have it in the neighborhood. So what you really have to look at is, if you're looking at the comps and they're all pretty tight in range, look at the 4 bedrooms versus the 3 bedrooms and see what the average increase is. And I know that takes a bit of time and effort, but you've got to try and figure out what that extra bedroom's worth. Now, to your point, Liana, honestly, a good ballpark often is 10,000, but it really depends on the location and what's there. The other problem is, let's say you're in an executive neighborhood where the houses are $500,000 to $800,000, and you've got the only 3-bedroom. That decrease is probably a whole lot more than $10,000 because most of the buyers that can afford that price range aren't buying 3 bedrooms. So you've got to look at any 3 bedrooms that have sold in that price range, and you're probably going to have to look at a broader and broader and broader area. So for example, if I'm looking at a 4,000 square foot house with only 3 bedrooms, I'm not looking just in Upper Macungie Township. I'm looking in the entire Parkland School District. And if I still can't find enough comparables, I'm expanding possibly the East Penn School District or north to the Northern Lehigh School District. If I'm in the Poconos and I'm looking in that, $1 million property, I probably have to look at least in the entire school district. And if more than that, then I'm going to the adjacent townships around that school district to try and find it. And try and find something that's at least comparable. But again, it depends on the house. And I'm not expecting you to be able to determine the precise value of that pole building or a double lot or a covered patio or granite counters. Again, the best thing to do is to try and keep expanding your search to find homes with that. So we sold a property with a very nice detached 6-car garage recently. And there are other houses like that. It was in Washington Township. So what we ended up doing was taking the 6 townships around that township and looking for anything that had a detached garage that was 3 or more bays. and try and look at those and see what the difference in value was for those versus that type of property without the large garage. And a lot of it is a little bit of guesswork as to what that is adding to the value, but you've got to add something for it. The problem is homeowners always want to add the cost. It cost me $85,000 to add that pool building. You're not getting that back. You're not getting 60 or 70,000 back for your in-ground pool. A new kitchen you might get your money back out of, maybe. Same thing with large acreage. You've got to search a broader area. So if you've got a house that sits on 20 acres, you're probably not going to find a whole lot of comparables in the township that you're in. So you're going to have to expand to the school district next. And if you can't find it in the school district, keep broadening out that search, stay in the same county, but just keep broadening out that search. It's the same thing appraisers do. You also may have to go back further, and maybe it's worth more than the houses that sold a year ago, but you might be able to at least find some comparables from a year ago that are on 15 or 20 acres. And by the way, when we're talking acreage, let me segue slightly. There's what we call the declining value to land. So one of the fun things is when an owner says, okay, these houses on 1 acre lots, the 1 acre lot sold for $100,000, and I've got a 5 acre lot with my house, therefore the lot is worth 500,000, and then we add the house to it. That doesn't work, because somebody who wants at least an acre lot would like to have 2 acres in many cases, but they're not going to pay double for that second acre. They're going to pay a lot less. And for the 5th acre, they're going to pay a lot less. Most buyers, if you're searching for a property and you've got 1 to 5 acres, you're going to be searching, or 2 to 5 acres, you're going to be searching the multi-list for lots that are in that 2 to 5 or 2 to 8 acre range with a house, to give you an example. Once you hit 10 acres, they can put the property into something called clean and green, into Act 319, and it significantly reduces their taxes. Because of that, if you're doing a 10 acre plus property, it's always good to try and search other 10 plus acre properties. But again, if you've got a house on 30 acres, now I'm trying to price 2 of them right now, one on 48 acres and one on 72 acres. I'm not going to find a whole lot of comparables like that. So I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to search for land parcels in the area that are similar in size. And I'm also going to search for houses on anything above, let's say, 15 acres. Because frankly, for most buyers, if they have 15 acres or 12 acres, that's plenty to have their 2 horses on. They don't necessarily need 50 unless they want a private estate. So that extra land doesn't add a significant amount of value, if that makes sense. I mean, nobody wants to hear that because they put a lot of money and effort into it, but it doesn't add as much value as they think it adds. Does that sort of help a little bit? I know this is hard because I can't tell you a garage is going to add 10,000 a bay and a bedroom is going to add 10,000 per bedroom. It's always depending on the area and what's around it, how much value that's going to add. But we can ballpark. Now, there's a lot of items that decrease value. I was in a property in Lehighton the other day, and I didn't make it past the first room because my eyes started watering. The cat smell was so bad, and I don't know what they were smoking in there, but it was awful. That hurts. The alternative is when something is wrong with a house, a buyer typically takes off more than the cost to repair it. Takes off more than the cost to repair it. That's because the buyer has to go through the pain of fixing it, or the buyer overestimates the cost to do the work. And homes that are in poor condition don't sell to buyers very often. They sell to investors and contractors. We all know most buyers don't want to do any work on the house they buy. And if they do, they aren't competent to replace kitchens unless they've got lots of money. And first-time buyers, as an example, don't necessarily have the money to put into a new kitchen or a new bathroom or whatever. So often these homes sell to investors or contractors, and investors and contractors don't ever pay full price for a property. They need to make money on some of the work they do, and they're going to have closing costs to buy and closing costs to sell, so they get discounted. That's why a contractor will typically pay somewhere around 65 to 70% of the value of the property. And that's something an owner has to understand. We can go for the retail buyer, or we can go for the investor. What are the 3 things to sell a house? It's not location, location, location. The location just gives you the price range. The 3 things to sell a house are pricing it right. That's by far the most important. Marketing it to the correct audience, and staging the home, the appearance. A poor appearance is going to increase the value of the house. So to Kathy's point earlier, how much money do you take off when you've got a coal furnace from 1927 and a roof that's curling badly and you've got chipping paint on every windowsill. First, you can try and look for comparables in the same condition. That's the best thing to do if you can do it. Find other properties that also need work and find out what they sold for. But very often, like Kathy said, you can't find them. So if you can't find comps of similar condition, then you estimate the cost to repair. And my rule of thumb is to take off at least 1.5 times that cost, not the cost itself. It's likely, honestly, to be double that. Now, maybe not for a kitchen. But for example, if you've got to recarpet the entire house and that carpeting you're figuring is going to be $5,000, you're going to have to take off at least $7,500, maybe $10,000 in value. And owners don't want to hear this, but it's reality. Because A, the buyer has to go through the pain of doing it. B, you're decreasing the number of buyers or limiting the number of buyers who can buy the house to somebody who also has money outside of purchasing the house, because most people use up everything they have to get the perfect house. And often you're limiting yourself to investors or contractors, and those people aren't going to pay as much. So in order to do that, you've got to take off more than the cost of actually doing the repair. So 1.5 times is usually the bare minimum. Sometimes it's twice as much. Does that answer your question, or should I try and take that a little further?
No, it helps. I mean, the problem is you could do a $20,000 kitchen or you could do a $120,000 kitchen. And so, I mean, obviously you've got to be within reason, but
Yeah.
do you use numbers that someone that's an investor coming in, and the investor's not going to put in a $120,000 kitchen.
Yeah.
They might even just put in a $10,000 kitchen. So where's the cutoff on the kitchen?
The base.
I typically think 20 grand for a kitchen and 5 for each bathroom, but I don't know.
That's about right. That's about right.
Even right.
Yeah, that's about right. So
and then you double that? Then
no,
you go 1.5 of that?
no, because the reason is we're looking at a basic kitchen. Typically, you're putting in a kitchen. You're not looking for that high end thing. So if a kitchen's going to cost 12 to 15,000 to put in for a basic kitchen, then multiplying that by 1.5, you're about 22.5. So you're in that range. Around 20,000 is not outrageous. Bathroom, it depends on what you want to do with it. So bathrooms typically, because people can live with them, I'm not taking off 1.5 times. I'm just taking off the cost of the bathroom. But most of the typical things like carpeting, painting, maybe not a roof, but carpeting and painting, you might take off 1.5 times. A roof, typically I just take off the cost of the roof. So if the roof is going to be 10,000, you're going to decrease the value by 10,000. But a lot of cosmetic items that have to be done, I take off 1.5 or 2 times that. And again, if it's going to sell to a contractor, it's more than that. But if you think we can get a retail buyer to buy it, it's probably at least 50% greater than the cost to do the work. Does that sort of make sense?
Yes, but if you find comps that sell that look similar, then do you just run with those?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
And as foreclosures come back in the market, we may see more of those again as well. And by the way, this has been an unusual market. So there have been people who've bought houses that need work and have paid honestly too much for them. They're doing that right now because they desperately want to have a house, and they're willing to pay a little bit more because they're locking in these crazy low interest rates. But I understand the logic. But as the market normalizes again, we have to compensate for a lot of these repairs that have to be done in some of these houses. The other thing that we have to compensate for is the location, negative or positive. And location issues can be the worst. And I've said this before too. Tim and I were doing a CMA in Allentown, just off 19th Street. And if you're familiar with that area, 22 is a 4-lane highway, obviously, but it's raised about, 40 feet in the air above that area. Like when you go under it on 19th Street, it's way above you. So this was a ranch house. The property backed up to that Route 22 that sat way above the home's backyard. And Tim and I are standing out on the back rear patio with the owner. And it's hard to miss the sounds of large tractor trailers screaming by at 65 miles an hour. It was so loud that when we were looking at the backyard, we had to yell back and forth to the owner to be heard. It was insane. I'm picturing, by the way, having family over for a picnic with this type of thing going on. And the seller, by the way, had pulled their own recent sales because they went to Zillow. they pulled up, similar houses, and Zillow doesn't know you back up to a highway. So it pulls similar properties in the same township, South Whitehall Township, and some of them are in much better locations on cul-de-sacs, next to parks, and in quiet neighborhoods. And the seller had formulated their idea of what the home was worth, saying, well, my house is just as nice as this house off Cedar Crest Boulevard, or this house over here, or this house on this cul-de-sac. And I looked at him, kind of in shock, and I waved behind me and said, honestly, you can't compare your location with theirs. You have this issue. And I pointed behind me. And the owner got really upset, and he said, I keep hearing all you realtors complain about the highway, and I really don't see a problem with it. We have lived here for over 20 years, Lauren, and there's only been one occasion, one time, when a car flipped over the guardrail and ended up in our yard. And it didn't hit the house, just ended up in the yard. And it's not real likely that that'll ever happen again. But either way, I'm sure no car will ever flip over and crash into the house. Now, I'm, of course, stunned at this point because I just meant the noise nobody could hear. I never thought about a car coming off the highway. So anyway, how much does a highway or an airport runway or railroad tracks depreciate the value of the property? Again, your first goal is to find recent sales that have the same situation. So when you're looking at those map searches, one thing you can do, you can even open it up without townships or school district, and you can try and draw a line using that map search along that railroad track or along that highway to find other properties that have sold. And in that case, I would go back further. So instead of going back 6 months, I might go back 2 years to try and find anything that's sold along the highway or along that railroad track or whatever next to the airport, in order to find recent sales that have that same situation. And by the way, appraisers do the same thing. If you can't find a property with that same situation, then you may need to talk to a local appraiser. We found that typically a serious noise situation typically reduces the value of the property by at least 10%. And that can be a lot. So if you've got a $250,000 home and you're next to railroad tracks or next to a highway, that's $25,000 depreciation. And backing up to a real significant negative, like an airport runway, can decrease the value by about 15%. It can decrease it by a lot. So, sorry, I thought I had another slide right after this.
What percentage did you say? What percentage did you say would be a reduction for?
So noise areas like highways, typically 10%. And the further away from the noise area you get, the less you have a problem. If you have a serious issue, if you back up to a runway, if you back up to a, if you're in Berks County and you back up to the farms that have all the farms that are growing the mushrooms, those are great. You're actually dropping probably 20%, but typically we figure 15% if you're backing up to railroad tracks or an airport runway. Go ahead. What were you saying?
How about power line running through the backyard?
Depends how close it is. Everything is a judgment call. So again, if you can find comps, that's the best way of doing it. If you can't, then figure that somebody who's got a power line relatively close to their house, the backyard. And when I say relatively close, I'm saying 60, 80 feet. You're probably going to lose 10% value because it's going to turn off a lot of buyers. If you've got a really long yard and it's 200 feet back, it's probably not going to seriously impact it. There are some buyers who will not buy it because it's in the view, but you're not going to have a real significant impact. High power lines can be ugly, though. We had an 8,000 square foot house that I did not sell, wasn't able to get rid of it, in Walnutport area, that had one of those massive power towers, and it was 18 feet off the back patio. I still don't know how that got built or how the house got built that close to it, because typically you've got a setback of like 50 feet from the power tower when you're building. On the other side, on this positive, if you're selling a waterfront property in one of the developments in Lake Wallenpaupack, you're going to get a lot more money than you would for just one that's a water view. Waterfront is higher value than water view, and water view is going to make a lot more money than if you have one 2 blocks back, but they've got lake rates. So again, when you're pulling comparables, you can search on at least the Pocono multi-list. You can on Lehigh Valley as well, for anything that is waterfront, or, and this is under lot description, or anything that is water view or lake view or a river view. And again, if you're trying to price it, you want to price waterfront with just waterfront properties, because that's where you're getting your value from. Water view, you want to price with water view properties. And by the way, I've had this argument with many owners who say, well, yeah, mine doesn't go right up to the water, but who would want to be right against the water? I have the view. Well, yeah, but you can't launch a boat right out of your backyard. So people always pay more for against the water, pay a little bit less for water view, and a lot less for ones that are not water view. So that's where you have to try and distinguish when you're trying to value it. If you're selling beachfront property, and again, yes, we do sell beachfront property in New Jersey, then compare that with other beachfront properties. And again, the further you get back from the ocean, the beach, or the boardwalk, the lower the price goes. So you're doing those map searches to try and figure it out. Golf course community, try and pull those lots directly on the course or that have a golf course view. Now, in golf courses, typically there's not a huge disparity between being on the course and having a view of the course. They're both preferential. But if you're in that same community and you don't have a golf view, you're not paying as much for that property. And again, please don't misunderstand me. Sellers will always think their property is just as good as the one that backs up to the course, but the comps tell a different story. And you may have to tell them your experience with appraisers and how appraisal prices get adjusted. So what happens when you can't find any comps because you've got a bizarre property? One thing you can do is ask for help. Try to figure out if there's an agent in the firm that sold several properties in that location. You can ask me, but if Jane knows Buck Hill Falls better than anybody else, she's going to be able to give you insights that I can't. And the same thing for any development. There's usually an agent in the firm somewhere that knows a particular area better than anybody else. So if you notice that somebody in the firm has sold several properties in the neighborhood, you might want to ask them about it. They're likely to be able to give you insight into the pricing. If that doesn't work, call your broker, your manager. You can call Tim or Teresa or Michelle or me. You can also call the lender you work with and let them know you're having trouble finding comps for a listing. Now, I'm not saying this is under agreement. You're trying to price it. But if you've got a lender that's pretty strong that you're working with, you can call your lender and say, hey, who is the best appraiser that you know in the area that I can call and ask for some help from? And they'll tell you who they like the best, and then call that appraiser and say, hey, Susan, the mortgage guru, told me that you were the best appraiser in the area. It's always good to butter them up first. Hey, Wassel, Susan, the mortgage guru, told me that you were the best appraiser in the area. And I've got a huge favor to ask. I'm getting ready to list a property in Saw Creek Estates, and I've got a dilemma, and I'm hoping you could help me. I'm really having trouble finding comps, and I'm wondering how you would handle a situation like this. Honestly, I have found that most appraisers will help you if they can. And if you use an appraiser once for advice or information, I would suggest sending them a thank you card, a $10 Starbucks gift card, something like that, because you may need them again. And often those appraisers are going to be your best source of giving you some objective information. And to the points of Kathy and Liana from earlier, when you run into a situation where you've got that extra bedroom in an area, or you've got a really unusual house in the area, sometimes it helps to call one of the appraisers and say, hey, how would you handle this? It doesn't hurt. Now, there are lots and lots of ways that sellers object to price. We can always come down later. One way to handle this is to say, I understand that you want to leave room to negotiate. And you might be hoping for that needle in a haystack buyer who will pay above everyone else. But my job is to help you to make good decisions. So I want to make sure I explain the issues pricing too high can create. When you price above the market, you're competing with properties in a higher price range, which means slightly larger homes or slightly newer homes, or homes with some features that you don't have. And buyers don't ever look at one home. They look at 10 or 12 or 15. And they make a decision based on the value that they give to each property looking through. They rank them in their minds. So you end up helping to sell other homes that may have a little bit more to offer if we're priced too high. And I know every home's unique and you've got a fantastic yard and you think you've got the best yard in the neighborhood. But the reality is there are houses in this higher price range that you're competing against that have some things that yours doesn't. For the buyers who would be likely to buy your home, most people don't even look at homes above their price range. That could mean fewer showings and fewer offers. And if the home sits on the market too long, buyers start to think something's wrong with it, or that you're desperate and it can lead to lowball offers. The best opportunity to sell your home for the highest price is in the first 2 weeks in the market. And again, if we really price the home well, you're more likely to get into a multiple offer or bidding situation where you're going to maximize your selling price. Does that make sense? Like I said, there are lots of ways that sellers object to home price. Let me ask all of you this. How do you handle it What do you say when someone says, I'm not going to give my house away? Anybody have a thought on what they say? Kathy, you've got to have something.
Yes, I always have something. With that, I get that. If I get that, I said I agree. No one wants to give your house away. But if you price too, are you talking in reference to pricing too high?
Yeah.
If you price too, I say if you price too high, you may lose buyers that are going to come and look at your house. So, and and if they're adamant, it's the only way I'm going to get the deal, as long as it's not too far out the price range. I mean, if they're talking like 50 grand over, I basically tell them, unfortunately, if I take your business, if I do this, I said, you're going to end up not being happy with me because you're going to think I didn't do my job because I wouldn't sell your house for 50,000 over because it's not worth 50,000 over.
Right.
So you have to be careful what you say, and you got to understand their personality. But I do use the buyer pool, and it often works.
Absolutely. One of the other ways that we can, and these are all the same things that you see, can't I start high? I can always come down later. I'm not going to give my house away. Another agent said they can get me more money. My neighbor got, and his home isn't as nice as mine. I refinanced it and appraised at. By the way, whenever you hear that, an appraisal for refinance is not the same as an appraisal when you're buying a property. Banks can pick their own appraisers when they're doing a refinance. And those appraisers are almost directed to say, hey, it's a performing loan, make it work. Or I don't need to sell. No, you don't need to sell, but that doesn't mean you should put it on the market and have it look silly. Anyway, one of the ways we're going to help direct the seller to reasonable pricing is to keep them focused on the future pleasure of their move and the potential pain of not selling at all. For those of you who heard my listing presentation, I often start the listing presentation with a series of questions, and I write down the answers to show them that I care, so that they like and trust me. That's when I first meet them. One of the questions I always ask is, what would it do to your plans if your house didn't sell? And it's interesting when you ask that question before you tour the house, because the reaction is almost priceless. You almost always get, what do you mean if my house doesn't sell? Well, even in this hot market, there are homes that expire off the market every single day. The main reason some homes don't sell is that they're priced above the market. So being in line with other homes selling is a critical component to selling your property. When I say that, and I try to get them thinking in that direction before we ever even talk about price, because so many other agents walk in and they jump up and down and say, I'm the best, I'm the brightest, I'm, the moonlight comes out of whatever. People get go a little crazy with how wonderful they are when they're walking through a house. And they focus on how gorgeous the property is, and the seller's price keeps going up as they talk to realtors. The reality is, if you go in reasonably in the beginning and say, I want to do the best I can for you, but the reality is some houses don't sell. And the reason they don't sell is because they're overpriced. So I'm going to help you to make good decisions. I'm going to help you to find the right buyer, but I've got to give you the right price range. So when I give them a price range and they don't seem quite as excited as I'd like, I have to ask them what they were hoping to get. And when I get the answer of 50,000 more, I start by acknowledging their feelings. I can certainly understand why you feel that way. I know you have really taken care of this home, or you've really put a lot of work into this home, whichever it is. And I absolutely understand why you'd want to get the most money possible for it. I want that for you too. But I also ultimately want to help you to achieve your goals and get you into that nice house at the beach, or get your daughter into that school district you want, or get you to Florida so you can be closer to your grandkids, or get you to that one level home so you don't have to deal with these steps. Again, everything you do, try and bring them back around to focus on what they want to do, not that price. Because if they focus solely on the price, it becomes a stumbling block that sometimes you can't get around. So try and refocus them. I can certainly understand why you feel that way. I know you've really taken great care of this home, and I absolutely understand why you'd want to get the most money possible for it. I want that for you too. But ultimately, I want to help you to achieve your goals. And to get that, get your daughter into that school district you want, or get you closer to your grandkids, or get you into that first floor house that you need. And one of the responses that I'll use is, we actually have to sell this property twice. The first time, we have to find a buyer who's ready, willing, and able to pay the highest price for your house. We're great at doing that. And then the second time we have to sell the house is when it gets appraised. See, over 98% of sold homes are sold with a mortgage, so they have to be appraised. And buyers are going to value the house based on other homes they see, the same homes I'm showing you as comparables. And appraisers are going to value your home based solely on what's sold recently, and it won't appraise higher than a similar recent sale. It just won't happen. So ultimately, well, then the buyer will have to pay more. Well, that doesn't always happen because often a buyer doesn't have the funds to make that happen. Let me show it to you, and sometimes I'll put it on paper. I might write down the typical buyer for your type of property has a 10% down conventional mortgage. So on a $200,000 house, I can do it for any number, but on a $200,000 house, 10% is $20,000. And you've got 5% roughly in closing costs. It's another $10,000. So they need $30,000 in cash to buy your house. And hopefully they've got that. That's what we're looking at. Now, let's say it only appraises at $180,000. The bank is only going to loan them 90% of that $180,000 because that's the value. So they need $18,000. They still need that $10,000 in closing costs. So we're at $28,000. And if they're going to pay the difference, they're going to have to pay another $20,000 on top of that. So instead of needing $30,000 in cash, they need $50,000. And that's where a lot of times the sale falls apart. And we're 4 or 5 or 6 weeks from now because appraisals take a while to get done, and there's nothing we can do to make that happen faster. And once you've got the moving company lined up, you're ready to go. And now we're in a tough situation at that point because it didn't appraise and the buyer may or may not have the funds to pay the difference. Believe me, I would absolutely love to get you a higher price than the market's indicating. Use that line as often as you can. I would love to get you a higher price than the market is indicating because it's not you saying it, it's the market. It would benefit both of us. You'd get a bigger check at settlement and I'd get a higher commission because I'm paid on a percentage. But that doesn't change the fact that the home will likely have to appraise. And again, tap back into your client's emotions. It's my job to get this house sold and get you to your grandkids. And that's really why we need to price it according to the market. If we price too high, you could ultimately end up in an even worse position when the listing gets stale on the market. So those are some of the things that I use when I'm trying to get them to come to reality. I might also say it's going to be your choice, but I think it's important to weigh the difference between what's more important to you. Is it more important to hit that $335,000 number for the house or another $10,000 above what I'm telling you, which is likely a slim chance? Or is it more important to ensure that we get you to Denver before your new job starts or get your son into the Parkland School District before school starts? You can also use words like, we could go fishing at this price, or listing at this price is a gamble or a risk. I like trying to tweak the words, if you can, to make them understand that it's really unlikely. We're not going to try this price. We're going to go fishing at this price. We're going to risk not selling the house or gamble on not selling the house by testing this price. You don't want to argue with your clients, but you want to carefully show them that you're on their side while trying to get them to price the property appropriately, because honestly, that is in their best interest. Your job is to help them to get the property sold. I work for you, and ultimately the price is your choice, but I want to make sure you understand the risks of pricing the property this high. Please understand that I've been in this business for 357 years, and I've seen families roll the dice far too often by pricing the property above the market, hoping to get a little higher price, and then the market shifts, or the listing becomes stale in the eyes of realtors and buyers. And that gamble to get a higher price ends up costing those families. Maybe I'll send this as an email so you can see the words, but again, roll the dice. I've seen families roll the dice far too often by pricing it above the market, but the listing becomes stale, and that gamble to get a higher price ends up costing them. Yeah.
I've also noticed that, especially in this market, where when you're showing them the average days on the market, I actually talk about that in advance before we get to price. Like when we go over the CMA, I actually point out properties that are on the market way longer. And I say, this is an example of overpricing. So before we even get to the price, I try to talk about the importance of pricing within range of what the market dictates. And that does help the ease, because when you finally get to that pricing point, I do the same thing. They'll say, okay, well, what do you think for price? I said, well, I want to know what you think for price. Same thing. You're ultimately, I work for you. It's ultimately your decision. I'm here to educate you. But what do you think? So if they come back with a really high price, then say, and then get into all that other stuff. But I do find that they get it in their head that, oh yeah, and then when I see something that's on the market for a while, sometimes the buyers will think, what's wrong with the house? Do
Yeah.
you want to be that house that's on the market for a while? And people think, what's wrong with the house? Or I also use the one, if you have the same exact, if there's the same exact house as yours and it's priced within market and you're out of range, which one's the buyer going to go look at? So there's ways you can say it without insulting them. But again, a lot of it you have to feel out, depends on the personality of the seller and how adamant they are.
True.
So
You can
but
also ask
anyway,
when you go ahead.
no, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. So one of the things I always try and ask what what would you like for the house? Now, about a third of the time, maybe 20 or 30% of the time, they will tell me what they really want for the house. Most of the time they will not. And just what Kathy said, they're going to say, well, that's what you're here for. So I might ask a second time later on, have you had the chance to study a competitive market analysis on your house? Oh, yeah, I have. Okay. Was it with another realtor? Yeah. What did they come up with? And again, about a third of them will tell you. And the other thing is, you might ask how much you still owe on the property, 187,000, and how much cash you need out of this in order to make the move. Sometimes they'll tell you the answer to that. What I'm trying to get up front is, how much do they need to sell it and how much are they looking to get for it? You'll also hear, but Zillow says, it's one of my favorite lines. And by the way, I have even heard agents, this drives me insane, please don't do this, say, well, the price should be X because Zillow says that's what it's worth. Oh, good Lord. Zillow is notoriously inaccurate. It's an algorithm. And by the way, we will probably do a training on RPR, Realtor Property Resource. That's another way to price property, but that's a whole nother discussion that'll take an hour long. So anyway, RPR is another way to try and price property using that software. But anyway, Zillow is notoriously inaccurate. Even in their own software, there's a disclaimer that it says it could be 10% or more off. Zillow has not seen your house. One of my favorite stories is that the CEO of Zillow sold his home in Seattle, and the Z estimate was 1.75 million, and the home sold for just a little over $1 million. And by the way, that's like 40% off. So they couldn't even estimate the value of the CEO's house. So don't trust your pricing to Zillow. They have not seen your house. So usually we can get around that. And then worst case, this is actually from Tom Ferry, if anybody's listened to him. If not, I would check out some of his stuff on YouTube. It's great. So worst case, you overprice it or they overprice it, you take the listing and you've got to try and get them to reduce it. And here are a couple of lines he uses that I really liked, so I outright stole them. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's what we have to decide. Right now, the agents, the market, and the buyers, the marketplace have rejected our price. So I'm not saying, hey, we're priced too high. Hey, I told you so. Right now, the agents, the markets, and the buyer in the marketplace have rejected our price. What would you like to do? I'm going to strongly recommend that we amend the price to be in alignment with what buyers are willing to pay in the marketplace. Great line. I'm going to strongly recommend that we amend the price to be in alignment with what buyers are willing to pay in the marketplace. And if the property needs repairs, we might say, I suggest we repackage, reposition, and amend the price. And by the way, repackaging and repositioning might be painting part of it and so on. You know, we had a house that we struggled to sell recently in this hot market that houses around it were selling. And we have the best marketing there is, so it wasn't marketing. When you walked in the house, there was a pet odor, which was part of the problem. It turned people off. And the second thing was, I don't know why it was, but the door frames were scratched going through some of the rooms and really need to be repainted. And seriously, it would take a teenager probably 2 hours to paint the couple of door frames that needed paint. And it was so obvious when you first walked in the door, but that set the tone for anybody walking through. And the owner kept saying, let the next person spend money on it. I've invested enough. Sometimes it's really hard to get them to understand we need to repackage, reposition, and possibly amend the price. We need to get your property in alignment with what buyers are expecting today. Again, another great way of saying price. We need to get your property into alignment with what buyers are expecting today. And just a quick note to remind you, stay in touch with your clients when you list a property and let them know what's happening every step of the way, because we are in a referral business. And if you don't take care of your clients, they won't send you referrals. And what's worse is if you don't take care of your clients, they will tell everybody they know that you suck. So you want to try and make them like you as much as possible. And in order to do that, really take care of them, really stay in touch with them. And that's what I've got for today. I went way, way over what I was expecting. Does anybody have any questions that I can sort of answer? And if not, that's okay. I hope this was somewhat helpful. Give you some ideas on some of the things we run through when we're trying to figure out the pricing of a property. And of course, how to describe that to a client when you're going through it.